In this video, I am going to talk about the origin, insertion, nerve supply and action of superficial group of extensor compartment muscles. The superficial group of muscle, in general, it takes a common extensor origin from front of the lateral epicondyle. The first muscle I am going to describe here is brachioradialis. This muscle takes its origin from the upper third of lateral supracondylar ridge of humerus and lateral intermuscular septum. Insertion of the muscle. It passes downwards along the preaxial border of the forearm and is inserted by a tendon to the base of styloid process of radius. The lower part of the muscle is crossed superficially by abductor pollicis longus, extensor pollicis brevis as they spiral down to the thumb. Proximal part of brachioradialis forms the lateral boundary of cubital fossa and overlaps radial nerve and radial artery. This muscle is supplied by the radial nerve above the elbow. Action of this muscle. It flexes the elbow joint and acts best in the mid-prone position. That's why it is also called as a shunt muscle. But it is not the pronator or supinator of the forearm. The next muscle is extensor carpi radialis longus. Origin of this muscle from the lower one-third of lateral supracondylar ridge of the humerus, common extensor origin, and the lateral intermuscular septum. The muscle passes downwards under cover of brachioradialis along with extensor carpi radialis brevis on deep surface. The tendons of the two radial extensors pass beneath the extensor retinaculum, lodges in a broad sulcus on the dorsal surface of lower end of radius lateral to dorsal tubercle of Lister and occupy the floor of anatomical snuff box. The radialis longus tendon is inserted into dorsal surface of base of second metacarpal bone. This muscle is supplied by the radial nerve above the elbow. The next muscle I am going to talk about is extensor carpi radialis brevis. Origin of this muscle from the lateral epicondyle of humerus, the radial collateral ligament of elbow joint. Insertion. The muscle passes downward deep to the extensor carpi radialis longus in naked contact with the shaft of the radius and is inserted into the dorsal surface of bases of second and third metacarpal bones. It is supplied by posterior interosseous nerve before it passes between the two strata of the supinator muscle. Action of this muscle. This muscle along with extensor carpi radialis longus produce extension of the wrist. Both radial extensors along with flexor carpi radialis acts as abductors of the wrist. The next muscle belongs to posterior group of superficial muscle, that is extensor digitorum. The origin and course of the muscle is, it arises from the front of lateral epicondyle as common extensor origin and forms a rounded belly in the middle of the forearm where it divides into 4 digital tendons for medial forefingers. The crowded tendons of extensor digitorum along with extensor indicis on the deep surface lodge in most medial groove on the lower end of the radius under cover of extensor retinaculum. On the dorsum of the hand, the 4 flat tendons, they diverge and reach the corresponding medial forefingers. The common tendons of index and little fingers are joined on the ulnar or medial sides by the tendon of extensor indicis and extensor digiti minimi respectively. So, insertion of this muscle or this tendon, each extensor tendons covers the dorsal surface of metacarpal head and proximal phalanx and forms a triangular dorsal digital expansion. The base of the expansion forms a hood over the metacarpal head, and each basal angle is anchored to the deep transverse metacarpal ligament. The apex of the expansion close to the distal end of the proximal phalanx, it trifurcates into median and two lateral bands. The median band is inserted into base of the middle phalanx. The lateral bands extend further distally and unite before insertion into the base of the distal phalanx. The margins of the expansion are thickened on the lateral side by the insertions of tendons of lumbricals and interosseous muscles, and on the medial side by interosseous only. The attachments of the intrinsic muscles to the dorsal digital expansion are described as the wing tendons. The nerve supply of the muscle is from the posterior interosseous branch of the radial nerve. The actions are the tendons of extensor digitorum. It acts as prime movers for extension at metacarpophalangeal and interphalangeal joints, but extension at the interphalangeal joints are completed only by the contraction of lumbricals and the interosseous muscle. The next muscle is extensor digiti minimi. So this is a slender muscle that arises from the common extensor tendon, passes distally along the medial surface of extensor digitorum and appears beneath the extensor retinaculum behind the inferior radio-ulnar joint. The tendon of digiti minimi accompanies the medial side of common extensor tendon for little finger and joined with the dorsal digital expansion of that finger. Extensor digiti muscle is supplied from posterior interosseous nerve. Action includes it extends the little finger and assists the action of extensor digitorum. The next muscle that runs across the ulnar side of the posterior part of the forearm, that is extensor carpi ulnaris. So origin of this muscle is from lateral epicondyle as common flexor origin, from the subcutaneous posterior border of ulna by an aponeurosis in common with origin of flexor carpi ulnaris. Insertion is the tendon of the muscle passes distally under cover of extensor retinaculum and lodges in a groove between the ulnar head and its styloid process. The tendon is inserted into a tubercle on the medial side of the base of the fifth metacarpal bone. Nerve supply is by posterior interosseous nerve. Now coming to the action of extensor carpi ulnaris. This muscle is contracting simultaneously with extensor carpi radialis longus and brevis, produce extension of the wrist, which is prerequisite for grasping any object. Combined actions of extensor and flexor carpi ulnaris produce adduction of the wrist. Next muscle is a small triangular muscle which is called as anconeus. Origin of anconeus is, as I mentioned, it is a triangular muscle, arises from the posterior surface of lateral epicondyle. Insertion, the muscle is inserted by a broad base to the lateral surface of olecranon process and upper 1/4 of the posterior surface of shaft of ulna. The nerve supply of anconeus is from the radial nerve in the spiral groove through the nerve to medial head of triceps. The action of this muscle is, it is an extensor of elbow joint and assists the action of triceps. Upper horizontal fibers helps in abduction of the ulna during the pronation of the forearm. Thank you.